Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Research Conference. Thank you so much for being here today. Today, our speaker is Sharon Terry, who is the president and CEO of Genetic Alliance, which is a large network engaging individuals, families, and communities to transform health. And as I was reading through Sharon's bio, I was sort of struck by the fact that this is one of the most interesting and certainly most impressive bios that we've seen so far at Research Conference this year. No offense to anyone who's spoken; you were wonderful too. But let me just tell you a little bit about Sharon and everything that she's accomplished over the past few decades. Her bio describes her as just a mom with a master's degree in theology, and I'll tell you a little bit about her work, and you can tell me if that's an accurate description. She co-founded PXE International, which is a research advocacy organization for the genetic condition pseudoxanthoma elasticum, or PXE. And this was in response to the diagnosis of her two children with PXE in 1994. With her husband, she co-discovered the ABCC6 gene and then patented it in 2000 to ensure ethical stewardship, and then assigned the rights for that patent to the foundation. She subsequently developed a diagnostic test, became a clinical trialist, and is the author of 140 peer-reviewed publications, which I'm sure has gone up since this was written. 30 of these are clinical PXE studies. She's received an honorary doctorate from Iona College for her community engagement work and is on the editorial board for several journals. She also led the coalition that was instrumental in the passage of the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. She co-founded the Genetic Alliance Registry and Biobank, and as many of you in this room who are connected to PCORNet know, she's co-PI for the PCORNet Coordinating Center and chair of the PCORNet Engagement Committee, and is also an Ashoka Fellow. With her husband, Patrick, she's an avid paragliding pilot. She's a rock climber and a weekend farmer. So please join me in welcoming Sharon Terry.
Thanks very much for having me here today. I'm really delighted, and a real nice intersection of old and new friends for me to come to Duke and in more kind of broad context. I'm here often, as people like Leslie and others can tell you, for PCORNet stuff, but it's really terrific to be here for a more kind of overarching talk. So my talk today is going to be on engagement. It's a little funny to give this talk to some of you, and I know to some of the people who are watching as well, because lots of you know more about engagement than I do. Again, lots of my learning is street knowledge and doing things essentially from the ground up. But I'm really happy to be able to talk to you guys about this today and essentially why people matter. So why I am here is why I think a lot of people wind up being here, and that's because it's personal for me, and I am a mom, and that makes me connected in a way that makes me very passionate about certain things, and Emily told you a little bit about this. My two kids, Elizabeth and Ian, were diagnosed with, and that was impressive that you could say pseudoxanthoma elasticum, with PXE in 1994. 2 days before Christmas that year, after the diagnostic odyssey of many years, I brought the kids to a dermatologist who happened to also be an ophthalmologist, which was a real just killer find for me, because PXE is a systemic disorder that affects eye, skin, cardiovascular system, et cetera. We went from being an ordinary family with two healthy kids to having a rare genetic diagnosis, including the possibility that they would die somewhere around 30 is what the literature said at the time. And that's not true. They are, and I'll at the end of this talk show you pictures of them today. My daughter turned 29 yesterday, and my son is 27. They would say happy and healthy, although they continue to progress in the disease. My husband and I didn't know what to do faced with this, and we thought that somebody takes care of this and that there would probably be a deli line and you take your ticket and they take care of PXE when they get to the P's. We learned really quickly by going to a medical library over Christmas that there was nothing going to be done on this disease, and there was no pattern that showed us that there was going to be any kind of cohesive effort to study the disease. And so about a month after the kids were diagnosed, my husband put this diagram together based on our reading papers we found. My husband went to a vocational technical school for high school and did not go to college. He was a fire protection engineer at the time. He built systems essentially for the Harvard hospitals and medical schools, putting in plumbing and heating and fire. So you can see that this looks like a plumbing diagram. And actually, this diagram has has been very useful to us, and we've actually covered every single square in the diagram over the years. And then that led for us to doing bench science. We asked for some bench space at Harvard. We discovered the gene. We patented the gene so that we would be the stewards. We created a diagnostic test. We took the test to FDA. We couldn't get it approved by FDA because of the low 4,000 number of people with the disease. We have since moved into clinical trials, and this year we have 4 therapies that we're testing in various stages between phase 1 and phase 2. All this has been important to me, obviously, but as we did it, we even said, I think we were only like 4 or 5 months in, and we said, why should we do this for one disease when probably lots of diseases need this, and let's instead build systems. And so we shifted some of our energy. I still run PXE International and still do all this work, but we shifted some of our energy to Genetic Alliance, which at the time was an alliance of genetic support groups was the name, and it was gathering support groups, at the time 200, now 2,000, who need support to do the kind of work that we were doing. And so we took our biobank and we scaled it. We said anybody can use it. We took our registry systems and scaled it and said anybody can use it. And now we're a network of about 10,000 organizations. Genetic Alliance just turned 30 this year, and we're in the process of looking at what will we be in the next years to come, as the world has changed a great deal. Even the word genetic in our name doesn't make any sense anymore. Some of you in here, we work with Newborn Screening Clearinghouse that we run. We also do things around the prenatal and preconception period, education sorts of things. Lots of systems change stuff. Even all the CORNET stuff is not genetic. So we're just looking at this year, how do we proceed and maintain this people focus that has been absolutely central to us all the way. So we have never come from the academic or the medical or the industrial kind of perspective. We've always just come from people who want stuff done, and how are we going to get it done. I have been driven all these years, all these now 22 years since the kid's diagnosis, with what I see as a secret. And the secret is that we do not have answers to health issues that are possible to solve. So while 22 years ago, nobody knew what to say about PXE to me, I now understand, and my brother and father had died the years before that, the 2 years before that, of colon cancer and glioblastoma. No one had answers for lots of the things they suffered. I now know that we don't have answers for lots and lots of things. That's why all of us are working really hard. We don't have answers for what do you need if you have type 1 diabetes or if you have a particular cancer. We have a lot of ideas about what to throw at things, but we don't have systematic ways to assess those things, which is why stuff like PCORNET and PMI and some other things I'll talk about are really important, because I think the answers are in all of us. So if we could engage the nation and the globe to participate in lots of different ways and in easy ways that are frictionless in their lives, the way we participate in everything else in our life, we would find answers much more quickly, and if we didn't have the misaligned incentives we have. So my drive really has been to understand what are these systems, how can we change them, and how are we going to make it possible to have these answers more quickly. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. PCORNET, again, some of you are more familiar than I and could be giving this part of the talk. I'm going to talk about PMI, the Precision Medicine Initiative. And again, there are those of you in the room like Bray who have way more familiarity with PMI than I do. I'm on the advisory committee only. And then I'm going to talk about a platform that I'm using and have used for many years to kind of get people to get engaged, and then we'll talk about some culture issues. So essentially, PCORNET, and apologies again to anybody who knows this inside and out, is a community of research. So we have 20 people-powered research networks, I like to say. They're actually called patient-powered research networks. And we have 13 clinical data research networks. That equals PCORNET. And Duke is 1/3 of the coordinating center. Laura has one of the PPRN, the patient-powered research networks. I run one of the patient-powered research networks. We are all working together to build a system that unites people, clinicians, and the systems themselves. This is too small to read, but there are 20 PPRN and the 13 CDRNs that are currently part of it. This gives us a national evidence system with research readiness to do the kinds of studies that we think people will want to know the answers to. And we definitely, when we map that out, see that we have some deficits that we need to overcome, and we're looking at how do we get more diversity, for example. And again, these data I have not, every time I give this talk, I say, I should get these updated, and Leslie's sitting right here, and I could get them updated like by sending, I could send her a text message right now. So these are out of date. But they give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're thinking about. Obviously more women are involved. Obviously more people who are white and the minority communities are not as involved. There's some age gaps in what we're doing. But overall, it's a lot of people. And were we to get these people really engaged, they would be very ready. And so while we get them together in various data systems, and we get them together in various engaged systems in the communities, we're working hard at what does it mean to get them engaged in both ways, that we have these data, we have more or less complete data, and we also have engaged communities who are ready to do this stuff. Again, this is from the middle of last year, about 145 million people with data ready. And essentially what happens, and this is very pertinent to Duke, is a researcher wants to have a question answered. It brings it to the coordinating center front door, which is actually housed here. A group of us work on whether or not the query that comes to the front door, the request that comes to the front door will be met. The coordinating center helps to facilitate where that would go and how that would be coordinated such that it gets answered as quickly as possible. And obviously this is the kind of system we really want to scale up and make happen much faster. What I also thought would be good to show you is just a couple of the PPRNs. I asked, then again, this is a while ago, about 6 months ago, for whomever of the PPRN wanted to give me examples of the kinds of things that they're doing, so just you get a flavor of them. And this one is the Mood Network, so this is looking at people with mood disorders around the nation. This one is a rare disease, Phelan-McDermott syndrome, which is an organization that has been a patient advocacy group and now has added in a lot of the data components. This one is an Immune Deficiency Foundation project, PI Connect. This one is a vasculitis network. This one is a Duchenne network. This one is a rare epilepsy network. So a whole host of networks that bring together people and clinicians and are looking at ways to increase, expand, expound upon the kinds of research that are important for those people and doing it in a more systematic way. So we're in the process right now of looking at how do we make this more robust with regard to both data as well as engaging people. And we've learned a lot from looking at each of these and from the CDRNs, and I didn't concentrate on those here, but there are some really wonderful things happening in the CDRNs around engagement that are also scalable solutions that then we even believe bring value to things like the CTSA network, which is also trying to figure out how to engage people. We need to start to look at how do we do that more systematically. And then the other big program that, we thought it'd be good for me to talk to you guys about is All of Us research program, which you know as the Precision Medicine Initiative. So the people part of it has now been called All of Us. And everybody here knows what precision medicine is, so I don't have to go over that. Essentially in 2015, President Obama announced that people would be partners in research. For those of us who were sitting in that room in the White House, it was quite remarkable to hear those words come out of the president's mouth because we had been beating that drum for 20 years. So that was quite amazing to have him say that this would actually be people-led, people-centric, and that will revolutionize medicine through it. We knew that day sitting in the White House that this would be a very heavy lift, and I think we know now that it's an even heavier lift probably than we thought, and that even though the president said it, it's still not real easy to do it. So this part of the Precision Medicine Initiative is embedded in NIH. The idea would be to get 1 million or more volunteers to reflect the diversity of the US, not to go deep into any one disease area, but instead this time to kind of go population-wide. And to have these volunteers stay engaged. So I think a lot of times in clinical research networks, we think people will enroll in a clinical trial, they'll go through the trial, and we'll never see them again. And the idea here is to keep people engaged longitudinally so they get that whatever comes up for them, maybe somebody's there to listen to them, and they don't have to borrow bench space at Harvard and work through the night trying to find the gene and all that sort of stuff. So there was $130 million enacted in FY16, which was a decent amount of money, and the request is for $230 million, and as we know, we're in the process of maybe shutting down the government with the lack of passing the budget, so we don't know what's happening there. The other kind of good signal to me was that this approach to diversity, and again, tons of this has to be credited to Bray, who's sitting right here with you, because she had a huge influence on this stuff, was that we're not just going to talk about diversity the way we might usually talk about it, which is sometimes diversity of disease, maybe if we get far enough, just diversity of populations in terms of race and ethnicity, but also to talk about geography and health status and data types, that we're really going to look more broadly than we normally do at diversity. And the idea that is that there would be involvement in every step of the program around figuring out what's going to be collected, what would be analyzed, how would results how would research be done, and how would results be returned. That's been super challenging, just to be somewhat frank, that it is one thing to say all this stuff, it's quite another in the current systems we have to try to do this sort of thing. And so I think those of you who have been tracking this know that PMI, and I don't remember the first date, Bray, we thought it would get launched sometime like September, then we thought November, and you know, I think figuring this out has been more challenging than people expected. So the idea that data sharing should be swift and access should be complete. I like to say smart Girl Scouts could have access to these data, and that would be an ultimate goal. Again, these things are really hard to do in the kind of systems we have currently set up, and so how do we figure out who will get access to what? How can we start small and then grow bigger? What's the investment overall that's going to be needed so that diverse researchers can play not just the same old suspects or the people who have the most R01s or whatever. So lots of great goals here. And again, really hard in the current system to figure out how to navigate this stuff. But I should say it's being led by Eric Dishman, who's formerly of Intel and is a patient himself and is a really smart guy who's really trying to break through some of the traditional boundaries that I hope will make a big difference here. There'll be two arms of this to engage people. One will be direct volunteers, so some of the people in PMI like to say, you know, their mothers who live in whatever, Arkansas or Michigan or wherever, will be able to participate, and then healthcare provider organizations. The program is going to start with questionnaires, so some patient-reported outcome kinds of things, EHR, baseline exams, and lots of discussion around what do you put in the baseline exam so that it's an accessible exam that can be done in many places. Mobile blood specimens and geospatial stuff. And the idea too, again, to start small and keep adding, because the good thing here is if you're doing a traditional clinical trial, you've got to do everything you need to do when that person walks in the door, and here you get the opportunity to do it next year, do it 6 months from now, do it next month, whatever. And then the selected scientific opportunities, again, they're not really trying to answer everything or boil the ocean here, but to look at things like quantitative estimates of risk, some pharmacogenomic stuff, biological markers that will signal risk of disease, solutions to health disparities, empowering the participants themselves. So a hope that this will be transformational, not just for the outcomes of the science, but also for how science is done overall. And then there was a survey done pretty early on that showed that, in fact, 79% of individuals who read a short description were very supportive of the program, and 54% said they would participate. My guess is that would be even higher, especially if the engagement is done really well, and if we remember that while this is a national program, we're going to have to be local in all cases. And that's my editorial comment. I'm not sure exactly where that's going to fall out, but the idea that people don't respond to a national thing unless it's 9/11. We more respond to what's happening in our own community, in the places we work. So key progress for them to date is essentially they have named a data center that's at Vanderbilt with the Broad and Verily. There's a biobank at Mayo. There's a participant technology center that's being run by Scripps and Vibrant, and then they've named a bunch of healthcare provider organizations in 2 waves. Those are all over the country, and the idea, again, is to get geographic diversity as well as diversity of race, ethnicity, age, that sort of stuff. These do overlap. PCORNet, they overlap CTSA, so the other question will be, how will we make sure these networks are not coordinated, that messaging, et cetera, for the average person, they don't care whether it's a CTSA, a PCORNet, CDRN, or a PMI, HPO asking them something. They want to be able be participating, again, rather locally through their clinician usually, or through this direct volunteer program, and hopefully it's tied to a community of some kind. They've also focused on the federally qualified health centers, which of course help with some of the more underserved and underrepresented communities, and HRSA is overseeing that part. And then the VA medical centers, some of them are participating, and that of course ties into the Million Veterans Project program, which has already had some legs in terms of what do you collect, how do you share information back, that sort of stuff. That program has some good feedback on what have veterans needed in terms of being participants in the project, so that's also helpful. And then the plans essentially are to get a technology platform and work like a technology platform company centered on user experience. And there's again, this is an editorial comment of mine, not as a member of the advisory board there, but and certainly something that I freely share with everybody involved. Technology platforms are great because they do enable enormous things. I mean, Matthew and I met earlier, and we were like, you can use Yelp to figure out a restaurant for this afternoon, or you can call up an Uber. All that stuff is really terrific. And for something like health, how do we also keep the high touch piece in? So we have the high tech piece, we need the high touch piece, we need to make sure that the experience is relevant. Certainly the feedback loops in Yelp and in Uber and things like that are really strong feedback loops. And how do we do that in health when so much of health is masked from us? The value, what things cost, how much I can affect the system. In Uber, I know that if I give this cab driver a terrible rating, he's going to give me a terrible rating, and then we're going to have a terrible rating thing going on here, and I'm not going to get picked up the next time. And for healthcare, we don't have the same kind of interaction, of course, and figuring out how do you do that in a really complex system. One taxi ride is so much easier than my care in several different health centers. And then goals, again, are what I said, that new model of research will result, a rich resource of data that's very open will result, and then increased knowledge leading to individualized care. And my hope too, and again, this is an editorial comment, that we would get to the place where 95% of our health happens outside of a medical center or hospital, and more that's going to be true, and how do we make sure that we're addressing my or anyone else's health needs outside of the system. So that brings me to a piece that I'll talk about quickly about a project that I've been working on for a long time. Because in all of these things, whether it's PCORNet or PMI or CTSAs or whatever, we're going to need to make sure people are engaged, and that's the crux of today's talk. And what we've been focusing on, and this is as Genetic Alliance for me, and then I brought it into PCORNet, I bring it into the PMI conversations I have. I'm also on the NCATS and the CAN Council, and I bring it to the CTSA conversations, is where do people want to be involved? And we always have these conversations that are dichotomous, because we Westerners love dichotomies. Things are black or white. They are this or that. This is horrible or this is good. And actually everything is gray, and we know that, but we love the ends. And so when we have this conversation, we often say people don't want to share data. Or we say everyone wants to share everything. It's not true, either one. And this great diagram by Ellen Weston for an Institute of Medicine study in 2009 showed that people's perspective was kind of all over the place, and that people at different times in their life around different things want to share different things. And what we do is, I think, especially in academic systems when we're trying to run clinical trials, is we say, oh, that's too complicated. I just need it to be one or the other. I need it to be blanket consent, or I need not to have these people's data shared beyond this study or whatever. And in fact, it's not too complicated. We actually can do it. And things like Facebook, for example, have a jillion privacy settings now. Most of us don't go in and change all those, but periodically, Facebook will tell you, this picture can be seen by everybody. Are you happy with that? And you can change the setting. So this is along the same principle of saying, I would like a little more ability to control. The other thing that we know through the program that we've been doing is that mostly people just want to be asked. They actually don't want to control everything. They just want to be asked. And my example for that always is, if I went to any one of your houses today after this talk and took your bicycle, you would call the police when you got home and say, my bicycle's been stolen. If I said to you, may I borrow your bicycle? I bet everybody in this room would say, yes, you could borrow my bicycle. It's a little cold out, but if you want to go for a bike ride, fine. That's all that you want, is somebody to ask you. And so I think what we've found is the same thing, as people want to be asked. Once they're asked, they're happy that they've had control. That's their control. And they go on to really participate quite robustly. So we've built a system that allows this kind of granularity, and we call it Platform for Engaging Everyone Responsibly. And it's creating an environment of trust because it's built in a community. Right now we have 45 communities sponsoring platforms. We don't brand them Genetic Alliance. Our name means nothing. We're an international network. The community is the one that brands them, and what you're looking at here is a Joubert syndrome, so people with the rare condition Joubert using the platform. We have everything from the American Nurse Midwives Association studying normal pregnancy to the Pennsylvania Health Alliance, which is studying the effects of fracking, to common and rare conditions on the platform. So a wide variety of uses. So essentially it's an iframe, for those of you who know some technology. It's inserted into the website. Looks like the website that it lives in. A trusted organization hosts it. They offer an opportunity to set up these privacy access data sharing preferences, and those result in contact information and privacy directives being in 2 separate databases. And then they invite the individual to bring forward either patient-reported outcomes, EHR data, lab results, so essentially health data, and that's put in a third database, a health data database. And then a data seeker comes along, that's a researcher who would like some information, and they will look at this health data and they say, I'd like to access that data, but now I got to ping the privacy directives, which is all done automatically so they can see what they can see. The individuals have said allow, deny, or ask me. So it actually has a middle setting of a maybe, which most systems don't. Most systems are yes or no. And then the same thing, so the data seeker says, well, now I've found, I don't know, 100 people who are taking one of 2 types of aspirin dose, and I need to enroll them. So what I need now is their contact information. And I do the same thing. I now ask, can I have your contact information? And the privacy directive will let me know whether or not I can do that. Lots of people said to us in the beginning, this project's now about 4 or 5 years old, this is too complicated. People don't get stuff like this because we all love to be very paternalistic around what people can get or not get. And so we've built guides into the project. So you're looking here at sickle cell guides, and the guides themselves actually have set preferences, and I can say, I'm really like Dolores, who's up here in the left-hand corner, because she's been working with the foundation, and I know her, and I get her, and I want to be like her, and so I'm going to choose her settings. Or I can make my own settings by setting this whole thing up manually. Here's pulmonary fibrosis. Again, a group of people. You'll see little dots under their names that show their sensitivity around sharing that correlate with that diagram that we had from Alan Weston. This guy, George, is a sports journalist in Memphis, and he's totally open. He talks about having his condition on the radio constantly, and so he's got very liberal sharing. This is a clinician who works with the community and believes people should be a little more cautious about what they share. So I can choose one of them and use them as a starting point or accept their sharing preferences. And I can also do this dynamically from my phone. And then the dashboard that then I go to, because I've chosen a guide, and then in this case I was a guide for a community, then for pancreatic cancer, then gives me a whole host of things, and I can look at 3 different levels of sharing. In this first column, just discover me, so that would be aggregate data. The second column, export and link to my data so that you could export the data set and use it. And the third column, get contact information or contact me. So different levels of sharing. What we find, and then along these horizontal, in this case PanCan is the sponsor, so the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, other researchers, and data analysis platforms like PCORNet. What we find is that most people share most things most of the time. So in our system, we only have about 25,000 people in here so far. About 85% are all green, allow, and about 10% are saying ask me, and about 5% have said deny. And people have asked, why did they go in there and say deny? We can't ask them because they said deny. My guess is that they want to have their information in there if and when they need to use it. And what I think we'll get are deny around certainly some mental health conditions, some conditions for which people feel some stigma, and then if a condition gets acute enough or there's a recent breakthrough, they may turn on maybe, and maybe they'll turn on allow. But in any case, they wanted to be part of this platform, and we're fine with them saying deny in that case. We use a gamified questionnaire system so people get results back right away, because again, I think one of the critical pieces around all this is how do people get results and how do they stay engaged, and people want to hear back about how they compare to others. And what we find is people want to be the same and want to be different than others, both. So they get to do that here because they will see some of the things that they do are the same as others, and some of the things they do are very different. It also allows the data to start to speak when researchers look at this and see, wow, people with this condition are always looking like this, then there's something going on there. Example for me, done before I had Peer and I was using FileMaker Pro, which is a very esoteric databasing system, was to see that every woman with PXE was getting a biopsy when they had a mammogram. PXE affects the eyes, it affects the flexor areas of the skin, and affects the cardiovascular system. I said this is like really crazy, and they were very anxious, these women. They were reporting a lot of anxiety on some of the patient-reported outcome scales. We then did a double-blind study of 250 women with PXE, 250 without, age-matched controls, and saw that every single woman with PXE had microcalcifications in breast arteries. We could then say to the women, you don't have to be monitored for cancer the way you have been. Also found the same thing out about microlithiasis in testicular management, because the men thought they were candidates for increased risk for testicular cancer, and they're not. So that was like a big shift in how people were treated, and practice guidelines were changed by these data actually starting to say something themselves. So I think what we want to look at is how do we make people partners in what we're doing, and that people are not patients but also co-investigators. There's a lot of worriedness about when people actually get involved. Isn't it going to cost more? Isn't it going to be more onerous? Isn't it going to be, if people start, for example, deciding which of their data will be shared, won't we have less data? What I like to say is, okay, so we're at 4% of people participate in clinical trials. What if we get it to 8%? Won't we be happy? It's pretty crazy that we are happy with what we have today, when in fact, I forgot the number of trials, the percent of trials that don't conclude because of low enrollment, and low is defined as 4 or something. So I think the other point for me is that we are often said we could be at the table. And so for studies, that often means that once during the course of a study, you'll consult one person. And I like to say, no, we actually would like to plan the meal, meaning that we should be involved actually the whole way along. And again, there's a lot of pushback. Won't that be hard because you don't understand what we're trying to do here, and blah, blah, blah. And I think, yes, there's some investment that has to be made up front in these kinds of things, and especially in the culture change that's going to need to be done. But in the long run, we're going to get more people participating for a longer time. We're also going to get these kind of ancillary benefits, like won't people be more supportive of research generally in the nation? Won't they care about both their academic medical center and their local kind of community hospital more? Won't they be more supportive of funding for research, that kind of stuff, if they get that there's a connection between, I have a cold and I want to walk into the pharmacy and get what I need. How did it get on the shelf? Like, nobody knows that. How am I the answer? Nobody knows that. So I think we really want to see how that can change. I think we want this to be frictionless. One thing that's astounding to me is, and even I'll go to NIH, and at the bus stop, the shuttle stop, there'll be a paper there with those things that hang off of it, and it says, would you like to be in a study for healthy people who are 60 years old and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how could you recruit for a study in a bus stop in Bethesda? That just doesn't make any sense to me. And other things are like I'm bombarded by in my email or in whatever search I just did, and those are semi-useful. This time of year I'm trying to figure out stocking stuffers, and I go, oh yeah, my daughter-in-law would really like that thing that just popped up on the side. Wouldn't that be nice if also something popped up that said, you could contribute in this way, and have that be right in my glide path, right where I live and play. That's usually not the case for what we do. And then I think we need to look at relevance, value, benefit, that sort of thing. Are we meeting the needs of the people? And if we do meet them, won't they be more engaged also? And I know we all say, well, we can't really meet their needs because we're going to have to try to get funding from NIH or funding from whomever, and that's really hard to do because NIH is not interested in the questions that the people are asking. And this is sort of a vicious cycle. Both are true. Both it's true that we're seeking funding and that NIH is not paying for the stuff that we want to get funded that would answer people's questions. We just need to figure out how to interrupt this cycle. And my way of doing it is to get people to be rabble-rousers. I think inside academic medical centers, there are other ways to do that. CoreNet is potentially one way, PMI is another way, and that there are ways to shift this culture. I think the results have to be visible and tangible, and when they're not, we need to say that. We need to say there were no conclusive results, or we don't know, or this is taking us 10 years to figure out, or we're caught in a publication cycle that's 2 years long, or the IRB won't approve this. So we need, I think, to be transparent about those things with people. And then I think that we need to find that sweet spot where you're solving my problems because I'm solving your problems, and it isn't just that I'm recruiting for your trial, or just that you're giving me the opportunity to sit once at a table, but that we really have genuine reciprocity of some kind. And I think that's hard to come by, but it's important. And then I think the last thing on this slide is, so beyond advocates and advocacy to affinity, and what I mean by that is, so 22 years ago I established a foundation. I am now one of 2,000 or 3,000 of these family-run patient foundations. We have started to become part of the problem. We are as entrenched in some cases, and I'm talking broadly here, as the academic institutions or the companies. We don't share. We decide we want to hoard. We decide that we're going to actually further our organization at the expense of our mission. And I'm being really rough in a way. I'm putting myself in that category, though, of asking constantly, is the mission first and foremost, or am I worried about fundraising so the organization continues? My husband and I like to say, we want to shut the lights off and go home. That's our goal. And so how do we get to that goal? And I think if every advocacy organization asked that question, we would see very different behavior and much more sharing and much more kind of pooling of resources, pooling of the things we need to do together, not reinventing the wheel. I mean, the numbers of audits and bookkeepers and systems and registry platforms, et cetera, that are being built is crazy, because we each want to build it ourselves, do it ourselves, not invent it here kind of mentality. And I also think it makes it hard because lots of us grew up in a brick and mortar era of thinking you have to be an organization that's going to have a membership dues and have a newsletter and stuff like that. And I think we're seeing people like affinities. So Facebook has 40,000 disease groups on it because you can set one up this afternoon about just your kids' autism, the special kind of school they go to, and whether or not they can play soccer. And that could be the whole focus of the Facebook group versus a foundation that has to meet 1,000 different needs. I also think we all tend toward affinities much easier. So we don't want to just go to one thing for all our needs. It's also why churches and temples don't have the participation they used to. We find ways to get our needs met in lots of different places now. We don't find it in 1 or 2 or 3 places. And I think we're going to need to do the same thing in medicine. What are the affinities that people have that would be great places to interject the kinds of things that we're interested in asking as we go? I think we also have to watch our language. It's been really remarkable to me that my ears hurt a lot in the various places I'm in, where there are genuine, amazing people who really want to change the culture and still say things like, let's let the people engage. Let's let the people come in. We are not letting. It is our right to do this and to be part of it. And so we really need to think about when those kinds of words get formulated in our mind, how do we get out of even that kind of thinking where we're giving permission to some group that actually already has permission. And actually we are the ones who have been given permission by society to safeguard this whole enterprise. And sometimes we're not doing that so well. And I'm putting myself in that category too. So the idea we need to discover our shared and our divergent values, sort of back to this dichotomous or not dichotomous look at the world. I think we also try to say, we're all in this together. We need to also say, and we're not, that we need to get published, we need to get promoted, we need to get tenure, we need to get NIH grants, we need to get whatever we need to get. As a foundation, I need to get money, or I'm not going to, I just turned 60 2 weeks ago. I exploited my 60th birthday for my foundation. I put on my Facebook page, donate money to my foundation because I turned 60. Okay, so we need to figure out where our values are aligned, where are they not aligned, and just be transparent about that. Just say, I so much more appreciate working with researchers who say to me, listen, I got to get X. In order to do that, I need this. And so are you willing to make a compromise to do this so that I can get that, because then we'll trade this. A lot of horse trading, a lot of negotiating. I don't think we're going to be able to do it in a different way. We can't say it's all kumbaya. We also can't say we're totally misaligned. I hate industry or I hate academia. No, there's definitely gray areas, Venn diagrams where we overlap beautifully, and there's other places we don't. So I think we need to be honest about that. I think we also need to start to talk about not using the word consent constantly. So that's our go-to word. It's our low-hanging fruit. We say if we could just get the language in consent forms harmonized, if we could just get the same consent form everywhere, if the consent forms could just be blanket consent forms, that is not going to work in the long run. And we know we have some great experiments. Care.data in the UK bombed big time because of that. Newborn screening in some states has been challenged because of kind of blanket consent or not consent. And I think instead we have to look at engagement. And it has to be human-centered design engagement. And now that is not part and parcel of how we usually do business in clinical trials or in our work in working in any kind of science. But basically it says that if you were going to make a car, you would probably have more than one person sit in it ever before you put it on the market. You might ask people if they were going to drink in the car and if they might like cup holders, those sorts of things. Car manufacturers get that and do all kinds of marketing analysis. We don't. We say the clinical trial is 55 miles from where you live. There is no public transportation, and you can only come at noon when you're supposed to be working. And it's only the day before Christmas that we're going to enroll, and we're going to do lumbar punctures on Hanukkah. So we need to be able to understand how do we design things for people such that they're useful, and we need to do that in an engaged way, not in a consent way. Consent is a transaction, so it's the kind of thing like most of us would not just meet somebody and say, let's have a transaction of some kind. We instead have an engagement that's nuanced, that has a lot of parts to it. We need to figure out how we're going to do that in medicine as well and put that back in. And it's certainly an evolving process. It's not about educating, so lots of times I also hear, we just need to educate people about how great it is, what we're doing is amazing. These kinds of things, the ideas of that newspaper ads or bus stop tear-offs or seminars, et cetera, are going to be the transformative thing. I mean, how many people can remember a brochure that changed your life? Nobody. An interaction that changed your life? Yeah. And even pieces of interaction that you got in a couple places. You know, the recent election, probably lots of people, no matter where you are on the spectrum of comfort with what's happened, you can figure out like what things have spoken to you that you've seen, what is the interaction around that thing, who did you talk to about it, that sort of stuff was how you learned something. And I think we need the same thing here. Again, I already covered this. Essentially, we need to start to figure out how do we use what we know. And we know a lot, like there's been a ton of sociological research on why these things have worked. Why does Waze, Twitter, the Bump, which is the pregnancy app, why do they work? And we know why they work. They work because I get to interact with others. I get to subvert the system in some way and do something faster that I would like to do. I get to communicate more broadly. We can do all those things in health. Now, lots of times here, the pushback is, well, the IRB won't let me. That's a catch-22 too. You know, what if we, the people, stood up and said, we want to have the Waze of healthcare, or we want the Uber of healthcare? Then the IRBs would have to start listening because the pressure on the institution would be such. That's really hard to get to because the IRBs kind of keep us down while we're trying to do that. And we're trying to figure out ways to move around that. So I think there's reasons for little participation overall in clinical science. It's a cottage industry in a way, and that's a kind of funny thing to say because it's highly regulated cottage industry. But again, like I said, I think that there's not a kind of concerted effort to do this in an intelligent way overall. There's little incentive to participate. What does it have to do with me? Am I going to get anything out of it? Why don't interventions just magically appear? You know, our feeling, certainly the first month our kids were diagnosed, is when is somebody going to do this disease? Of course they're going to do it. No, they're not. And you know, we all need to get to understand that. And then how do we figure out how to overcome the friction in the system? So in other industries, we see co-design, we see consumer testing, we see consumer preference analysis, and a responsiveness we don't see in this industry. And I know we don't like to think about it that way, but we need to think about it that way and as a very human endeavor, both. And if we start to do that, I think we could start to bring in some things from the other kinds of things we've seen. So for example, the lean startup model that really allows us to keep building and learning and building and learning. We're going to have to tell people the secret that we don't know what we're doing if we're going to do this. And I think people will be comfortable with that and actually find that more authentic overall. You guys know this model quite well since it grew up here, and certainly Citi has done tons and tons around engagement. The idea that we're all going to need to be in many places on the pathway has been well laid out as well, so not something we need to go on about. Another system map that I've drawn that was that I published in 2013 and has been recently revised and will be appearing in Science Translational Medicine again, is called NETS, Navigating the Ecosystem of Translational Science. Essentially, these are neighborhoods that look at things like high throughput screening or the regulatory pathway, and essentially take people, and it's built for people. I built this for people, for moms and dads to navigate this system. It's on our website. If you click on it, you get tons of resources. You get city resources, you get FDA resources, you get resources from foundations for each of these areas if you want to get involved in them. So again, trying to figure out how do we get a consumer revolution and get the pieces to the people that need them. So I think an informed public that is engaged can drive all aspects of clinical research. And again, this is not a piece I need to talk about here very much because you guys have understood all along that it's all the way through. It isn't just at the end. It isn't just when you're returning results. It's not just when you're setting up a consent or an engagement system, but instead looking at how do you advance the public's trust by truly being involved the whole way and not just announcing something at the very end. This is going to require a culture change that will be non-paternalistic or maternalistic, that we're going to have to stop talking down to people and actually include them, to share the investigation with them as partners. I think if we could set the passion of people on fire, it'll fuel this revolution. And for me, that means capturing certainly people like me who are sort of at one end of the spectrum because I have two kids who would have a very different life if I didn't give my life to it. There's lots of people in the middle who would like to just be ordinary moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas who don't have a pathway to making any kind of change happen. And I think if we could give tools to people, they would also be very engaged. And then engagement, I think, has to be equal to other aspects. I would love, and I actually have a paper coming out in Science Translational Medicine in another week or two, that asks, how much money will we see has been spent on engagement for PCORNet and PMI? And I'm only asking that question because I think it's a good indicator of what do we care about engagement. And there's lots of people who say, well, but engagement's also embedded in the blah, 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 and the blah, 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 and the common data model, and the, whatever. Yeah, and, how truthful are we about how invested are we in engagement? It's a hard question and certainly one that I think we need to be asking. A big piece, and PCORNet about a year ago did a meeting on this, is we should not be asking, why don't people trust me, or why don't you trust me? Because that puts the onus on the people. I should be asking, how am I trustworthy or not? And I should be really honest about the not part. When am I not transparent? When am I not explaining the limitations of what I'm doing? When am I not showing that I'm actually doing this part because I do need a paper published? So how do I start to become trustworthy is on me and not on the people I'm trying to enroll in studies or participate with me. Facing our fears, so I just finished last week a TED Talk that will be up in another week or two, and it was on fear. It was on clinical science and data sharing, but it was on fear. I think that if we ran to ground most of the things we're talking about, we're afraid of something. We're afraid that we're not going to keep our job. We're afraid we're not going to produce well. We're afraid we're not going to get promoted. We're afraid we're not going to be the person we think we are in the world. And I think if we step into that fear, we start to discover all kinds of really wonderful things, like it's not so bad. There are lots of other people afraid. There's a whole bunch of us in this game together if we all would risk together. When I built the biobank with advocacy groups, I said, it's like standing on the edge of that swimming pool when you're 7 years old and you don't want to jump in because it's cold. But if you hold the hand of your best friend or a couple of your best friends and jump in together, you're all doing it at once. So for me, I think it's figuring out how do we get into that fear and understand the root of it so that we are actually making the transformations we need to make. I think this is also an important thing that participants, partners need to be accountable to. So I think we get a pass as patients, as participants sometimes. I think, if we're at a meeting and we say something, people go, oh, okay, yeah, I'm not going to challenge that because she's a parent of some kids, I think we have to be accountable as well. I think we need to abide by professional standards, just like the clinicians and researchers we work with. I think we should be accountable. I think we should be questioned. I think the game should be equal and reciprocal, and we should not be held in any kind of special status. I see that too much. I see the patients are kind of like kowtowed to, and then they're not really taken seriously, because that's a different kind of discrimination, and I think we need to get bold about that as well. And then we're absolutely going to make mistakes. I think we just need to apologize and move on from those mistakes, but we have to be honest about the mistakes or people will know that we're not. In 2014, my son Ian, who was the baby boy in the first picture, got married, and in 2015, my daughter, who is in the white, got married as well. Both kids would tell you that they are happy and healthy. They totally stopped us in our tracks when they were just maybe 9 and 11 years old. They said to us at a dinner when we were saying, oh, we just haven't made enough difference and there's not enough change, and they said, stop. When you start to live with disease like we do and not fight disease, then you will start to have an impression on what's happening. And for us, you know, it was stunning. And they have lived with that all their lives. They absolutely have ramifications. I mean, you can't really see them quite clearly here, but my daughter has skin in areas of her body that look like she's 90 years old. For her, it is part of who she is, and it is a piece of what, you know, what life brought. Both of them could lose their vision. They could be legally blind in the next 10 years. Now, it's one thing for them to say today, that's fine. They don't exactly say that. They say that will be hard. We need to think about what that will mean for our lives. But they're also not in a place where it consumes them or is who they are. They are much more than their disease. And they have taught me a great deal in that regard as well. So more information on several of the things that I showed you is here. And thank you very much for paying attention all this time. Thanks. And I'm happy, I think we have like 2 or 3 minutes for Leslie.
So, really a terrific talk, Sharon, and really inspirational, so thank you for that. Now to a less inspirational topic, and that is the IRB.
Yeah.
Where, for whom, I would say engagement is not really a construct that resonates with them. And you sort of mentioned, like, we need to work on that. What can we do locally? What can we do here? What can we do nationally to help change that conversation?
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts on that. One grows out of my position as the chair of the engagement committee for PCORNet. The engagement committee decided this was a problem and wanted to look at it from the engagement point of view. And what we've decided is it is important for people to say something, because it's one thing for you guys who actually have a lot of skin in the game to say to the IRB, I want XYZ to happen. It's very different for people to say, we're comfortable with XYZ happening. And the biggest thing for me, I think, is saying, when we see increased engagement, I think, and this is a hypothesis of mine that I haven't proven, that we're seeing increasing nervousness and skittishness on the part of the IRBs, which should be inversely, you know, that should not be the case. We should be more comfortable with more engagement. But what we're finding, at least in the projects I'm doing, the more engagement there is, like if I say patients are involved in the setting of the research question, the protocol, then the IRB is very nervous that people are involved the whole way. They'd rather it be clean and that people are just getting results back at the end. So, and that's not true across the board. But so I think one thing we need to do is figure out how do we get a groundswell of individuals making enough noise. And so the engagement committee is looking at, can we put together, for example, and this is not a decision of the engagement committee, but our conversation of essentially a mandate that comes from people. And if we took all the people in PCORNet, and it's 145 million or whatever, obviously not going to all endorse this, but if tens of thousands of them endorsed a statement that said, here's why we need to accept more risk in situations where we can control it, accept it where we can't control it, and actually be more engaged, I think some set of principles might be useful. Bray?
There's the PCORNet Building Public Trust workshop. It sounds like, maybe have the IRB administrators and liaisons come and participate in a workshop and have a dialogue and learn new models would be good.
Yeah, and so we've had the opportunity to talk a couple different times to like Primer and some of the other organizations, also engage with Jerry Menikoff at the Office of Human Research Protections, and there's an enormous cultural lift here. I mean, on the one hand, you can get it. The IRB system was set up to protect especially people who had been marginalized or were at higher risk, that sort of thing. But now when the people themselves are part of the equation, why can't we speak for ourselves? And so, for example, we're setting up a study across all the PPRN looking at mindfulness light and mindfulness. There's not a lot of risk in whether you meditate 2 minutes or 10 minutes a day. So can we figure out how this could be a prototype for doing more of this kind of research and having people very involved along the way? Yes?
Hi, thank you so much for such a great perspective and such a great talk. So I think this is a very small portion of what you're talking about in terms of overall engagement, but in terms of engaging patients in clinical trials, I think there's a lot of difficulty in at least convincing someone of your motives and if you share the same incentives. And like I personally feel like it's difficult for us to convince patients that they should do all this work for clinical trial because it's for the greater good, and that, you know, we're all here to do research for some of the greater good, but it also helps our career and puts lights on this building and like for us to build more buildings. So like, and that this is it's a money-making enterprise for us and for like every private practice that these patients are into. So what, like how do you think we can broach that barrier, and what do you think, like, if we should be paying patients, if that would be a role in some of these?
Yeah, so great question, you know, how to essentially explain what it is you're doing. So I think there's a lot of great questions in there. First of all, I think if people are powering these questions from the start, even if they're yours to start with, and you get a group of people who also want the answer to this, then you have a cadre, a community who really wants to push this thing. If you're honest with them along the way, if you say, okay, to keep the lights on at Duke costs 60% of the project's money. First, they'll be shocked. The first time I saw an indirect rate from a university on my R13 for my meeting for PXE, and that university was going to take more than 50% of my money, it was shocking. Now it doesn't shock me, because I learned that they do need to keep the lights on, they need to run the IRB, they need to blah, blah, blah. So I think explaining that stuff along the way. And then I think the other piece is going to have to be a big question for institutions and for funders, et cetera, and that is to say, what in this is waste? Is there any waste? I would imagine yes. I would imagine that the institutions don't want the waste because they would rather have it be cleaner than that. So I think the institution's going to have to do some soul searching. The funders are going to have to do soul searching around what they're rewarding, because the reason that you're looking for a paper, a promotion, tenure, is because that's the path we've built that is a path to success. What if paths to success were something different? What if there were points assigned to you for collaborating, points assigned to you for engaging, you know, and some economy essentially set up around those things? Then you'd find that as valuable as a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine. You know, how do we get to that point? That's a big, big leap, but I do think it's one that if we were intentional about, we could build systems toward it. I would recommend that we take pieces, and so, you know, the challenge would be to take DCRI or just PCORNet or just PMI and actually run controlled experiments. Like, what happens if we set up a different economy in those, whereby the institution said, I'm going to reward you if there's more than 10 authors on your paper and you're middle. I'm going to reward you if you've engaged people all along the way and Bray has certified that it was true engagement. That kind of thing. And the institution said, and therefore you'll be eligible for tenure more quickly because of these things, and just in a controlled experiment. That would be really fascinating to me to see, could we build a different economy? And there are small experiments, like Improve Care Now at Cincinnati Children's Hospital has actually built a system like this that is working and needs, I think, scale up. So I think there's opportunities to take what's working and move it. But it will take an appetite by leadership and an appetite by those of us who are not leaders to take risks on both sides. Which brings me back to fear, and I think we have to look at what are we, both sides are afraid, and what are we afraid of, and how can we come together in those fears? And then the question of paying people. So I'm not opposed to paying people because we get paid. You know, I get paid if I'm going to do a clinical trial as the investigator. Can I pay the people without being coercive? Well, am I coerced because of the money I'm receiving? To some degree, yes. Because I know that I'm going to produce a report in a certain way, I'm going to look at data in a certain way because of being paid. Now, I'm not vulnerable the way a person in a clinical trial is. So I think we also need to have that conversation and figure out. And the question to me would be, too, do they want money or do they want something else? So as a mom of kids, if you told me I'm incentivizing your participation in this trial with $100,000 or with the potential for a treatment for your kids, I'm going to take the treatment for my kids, not the $100,000. So is there some way now you can turn the treatment for my kids into an incentive for me that is valuable to me and is a actual commerce for me that isn't money, and then we stay away from the things we're afraid of in money? So I think there's some questions there we could test. And we don't test them. We continue to bomb on doing the same thing over and over. Enroll, you know, send a flyer out, send an email, whatever. And we don't test them like we test the other parts of the science we do. If we held those pieces to the same rigor, if we held engagement to the same rigor as we do, you know, the science, if we're looking for chi-squares in the engagement, what would that look like? I think we haven't had that experiment. Other fields have, though, and we know that there are tools to use in sociology and anthropology that are useful, and we don't apply them. We think we have to invent them in biomedical research. Thank you.